Welcome to my natural birth story. Today, I am taking a break from motherhood to share my powerful natural birth story and lessons with all of you. Giving birth was the hardest thing I have ever done in my whole life. And at the same time, the most rewarding. As any mother knows, that's how the story usually goes. Now, most women have no idea what they're capable of or that they even have options when it comes to interventions in their birth or just in your health and in your medical journey wherever you are. Which is why I wanted to jump in here today, take a little break from my sweet little boy, and share this story with all of you. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. All right. Welcome to this very special episode here on the podcast. It has taken me almost 7 weeks to sit down and record this episode for a whole slew of reasons. It is really hard to get some time alone when Landon doesn't need me and when I actually feel rested and have a little bit of energy to share with all of you and record this episode. So I'm finally doing it. I'm so excited to be here and to share what I've been through, not necessarily over the last 7 weeks, but in his actual birth. And this is a story that is filled with wisdom, whether or not you are planning on giving birth, pregnant, have given birth, or are absolutely past all those years. I know many of my listeners, you've done the kid thing, you're past that, but perhaps you're navigating some other health challenges, right? Or dealing with the medical system in general. So there's a lot of what I want to share here with all of you that's really going to apply to any of your journeys. Any of us as women, this truth that we just don't have trust in our bodies anymore. And at the same time, we have no idea that we even have options when it comes to the medical system. So I'm going to be addressing some of these through sharing my story. And of course, just sharing my story for those who want to know. And this is really why I wanted to record this episode, right? Really to help empower all of you women listening to this to really start understanding at a different level the wisdom and power that you hold. And that is really in all areas of health. Whatever you're going through in your body right now is learning how to trust that wisdom again, learning how to trust your body is telling you what it needs, knowing that it can heal, it can regenerate, it can do really hard things, whether it's overcome a disease, give birth, you name it, right? Like we are so crazy powerful. And this is one of the biggest reminders that came for me out of this birth journey and even, the last 7 weeks of motherhood. So knowing that you have this wisdom and that this is really ultimately a journey of trusting yourself again and really knowing that even in the complicated world of the medical system, you have choices. Excuse me. So before I get into my actual birth story, this is really important. Disclaimer. Big disclaimer here for all of you, as I know that I'm going to be sharing a lot of my beliefs here, my very strong beliefs about natural health and about doing things naturally. This is whether it's not taking pharmaceuticals because you have a headache or not taking drugs in your birth journey. Now, this was something that was really important to me. And I want to really preface this whole story with no judgment. This is really important because I know that some of you may listen to this and feel judged, right? And I want you to know that's not coming from me. That may be your own self-judgment showing up. I know that, yes, I very strongly believe that when it comes to our health and our bodies, whether it's birthing children or healing, natural is always best. Doing things naturally, getting out of our own body's way, using less drugs or no drugs, and using the wisdom of nature is going to be best. I strongly believe that. But I also strongly believe that we all get to choose what is best for us. And that is not always smart and safe to have zero interventions during birth. So I want to specifically speak about birth here for any of you who are going on this journey or have recently been on it or been on it before. Every woman's birth story is going to be different. And what you decided was best for you is wonderful. And I really want you to know that I support that. And I'm not here to judge if you did all the drugs and took all the interventions during your birth or somewhere in between. I really want you to know that this is not a black and white situation, and everyone's body is different health considerations, right? For some women, it's just not safe to have a natural birth. So please know that I fully support whatever journey you're on, but I want to share with you what is possible. I've had a lot of women in and actually in my family even come to me since this telling me, I wish I knew I had those options when I gave birth. I wish I knew that that was possible. I wish I knew that I could have done that. And that's why I want to share this story with you, because we have so much more power over and control over our health journey than we think we do. And the other disclaimer here before I get into things is this is not medical advice. Okay. I am literally just sharing my story and the things that I've learned from the people that I've really surrounded myself with, the amazing books and resources, which FYI, I'm going to share some of those in the show notes below for anyone who's interested in learning a bit more about natural birth and why it is so important. And for me, this whole idea of natural birth, let me just define that. For me, that means minimal, if none, no interventions, no drugs, no epidurals, no pain medications, no hospitals, no knives and doctors. So, as innately natural as it could be for me as a woman giving birth on this planet, thinking back to the way my ancestors and women before me used to give birth at home, right, with a birth keeper or a midwife, supporting, trusting the wisdom of the body, minimal poking and prodding and intervening. So for me, that was really an important piece. As soon as I found out I was pregnant, I knew that I was going to want to have the most natural birth possible. And the unfortunate truth is, the more I've learned in this journey when I was pregnant, and the more I've researched, the more we see clearly that the intervention of the medical system coming in and messing with women's bodies with the birth process has actually increased negative outcomes in birth, not helped. And you'll obviously hear different stories about that when you actually go and talk to an OBGYN or a doctor in the hospital, right? They're not going to tell you that. They're going to say, "No, this is really important that we poke and prod and intervene because things could go wrong." And this is another place where we are being taught to not trust our bodies. Right. And it's almost like for most of time, women haven't been able to give birth on their own, right? There's actually a huge history of birthing when actually white men came in, doctors came in and decided that it was their role to tell women how to birth. And that right there is a major problem. When a man comes in and tells a woman what to do with her body and that he knows her body better, huge, massive red flag. There's a lot of anyone who's interested in this, definitely do your own research. It is scary and fascinating to learn how the, patriarchal medical system came in and actually hijacked the women's this beautiful powerful process that women know how to go through innately. We are born onto this planet knowing how to give birth and knowing how to support other women in giving birth. Our bodies are literally built for it. And yes, things can go wrong. Sometimes it's very helpful to have a medical professional there, and thankful for midwives who can now fill that role and blend those two worlds together. But I just want you to know that this is a really complicated topic and one that I was shocked to learn a lot of the details. For example, one of the things that came to light is the reason you see in movies and women are taught to give birth laying on their back is because it was more convenient for the male doctor to sit between her legs with their headlamp when she was laying in that position. So it was more convenient for him. It is the worst position to give birth in. Anyone who has tried giving birth on their back, I've heard countless stories. It is absolutely painful and really challenging. We're actually meant to use gravity to give birth. So more natural positions being either on all fours or even standing up, holding on to something. These are definitely more natural positions that will make it more easeful for your pelvis to move in the right ways and for baby to come out. So there's just the interventions that have, I mean, we can see this in any area of the medical system, right? Oftentimes, more medical prodding is not better. Okay. And yes, right? I'm saying sometimes it's necessary and helpful, right? If you're having complications during birth, I want a doctor there. I want someone there to support, right? Or to emergency C-section. But what is happening in the industry around birth is these interventions are happening way too often and way too unnecessarily. This is very, very much about convenience for medical staff. Hospitals are run in a way that it is about speeding the process up, whether it's inducing your labor or just quick, let's have a C-section before even giving you a chance to push. Like just so much going on here behind the scenes that takes us as women out of our bodies and out of our ability to really tune into what we know is right. And that innately also can often harm the baby. A lot of these interventions, the things that I personally read about things like epidurals, Pitocin shots, inducing labor with all these other drugs that they give you, even the morphine that they offer you. I was offered morphine. All of these things go directly into your baby, right? Go in through the placenta into your baby and thus create a cascade of interventions, they call it, right? So if the epidural or the Pitocin shot that they give you to induce labor starts slowing the baby's heart rate because now there's a drug in your baby, right? And now the heart rate's slowing. So hurry, we need to use forceps, or you need to push harder, or we need to have an emergency C-section. It's a cascade that happens very quickly as soon as you start allowing interventions to take place. So I don't want to spend too much time ranting about this, but I do want you all to know that I'm very passionate about this. And it was very much a part of my learning and really solidifying for me that I wanted to have as natural a birth as possible. And at the same time, that choice was terrifying. I want all of you to know that it was not easy to say, okay, I'm not going to have any pain meds and I'm going to face this pain because it's going to hurt. There's a human coming out of me. That was scary. I wasn't, totally oblivious to the fact that this is going to be really hard. And I made that choice anyway, because I knew it was the healthiest choice for me and for my baby and for the deep wisdom that I have in my body, knowing that billions of women have given birth without any interventions. And somehow humanity is still here. Somehow we have an overpopulation issue, right? So babies are being born. Uh, anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. In anyone who is pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, I highly encourage you to just do your own research about these interventions. And by research, I don't mean talk to your doctor. I mean actually alternative research, and there's a lot of information online. Like I said, I'll post some really good books below, because we have got to take our power back. That is really what this is. And I've talked about that so many times on this podcast, right? Beyond just the story of birth, that it is time for us to take our power back, right? Especially from the medical industry, and learn how to trust the wisdom of our bodies again. And this is just one area that I really had to face that. And I know that I preach that a lot here on the podcast, and here I am practicing it. And it was hard. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to share the story with you, at least the short version of it, because it's a long story. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I'm so glad that I did it. I'm so glad, this future me is so glad that I did not take the chance to put any of these drugs in my child, in my body, and to have him be the picture of health, coming out in this way, and, luckily not having any complications. So, end of sentence. Let's leave it there. Let's dive into my story. I want to start the story with a little bit about before going into labor. There was a lot of prep. I had nine and a half months or so to prepare, to learn, to read books, And a big part of my preparation, I knew right away, as I said, that I wanted to have a natural birth, that I wanted to have a home birth. I wanted to give birth in the comfort of my own home, as my ancestors did. I wanted to really have it as natural as possible. So finding a midwife in Canada, that is really the only way, shouldn't say that. There's also a new and up and coming movement of women actually giving birth completely on their own called sovereign birth. I knew that wasn't for me. I wanted a medical professional there. So I wanted to find a balance between the two. And the midwife here in Canada is the way that we do that. And if you want to have a home birth, you have to have a midwife. And that midwife has to operate in the radius of the hospital of the town that you live in. So there's a 30-minute or so radius that you have to kind of be within that hospital in case of emergency. So I had to find a midwife in the town that we just moved to. And the short story of that is it was impossible. It felt impossible to find a midwife. I live in apparently the place in Canada that has the most home births in all of Canada and the least midwives. So odds were stacked against me, but I kept believing, I kept manifesting, I kept pushing and reaching out and following up and really having to trust that process. And I'm so glad that it did unfold beautifully. I was able to find a midwife who actually didn't work for one of the clinics. She's actually one of the OG midwives in the valley that I live in. And so lucky to have had her. She has been a midwife for, I think, almost 30 years and has so much deep wisdom. Everyone I talk to in the community says that she was their midwife. So she's been around for a while delivering babies here. And I knew that she was a woman for me. Very, very much aligned in trusting in the body and really allowing me to make decisions that felt right to me, helping me navigate all the choices, around interventions and around cervical checks and, all the things that come up, even pre-labor. So that was a big piece. So I did finally, I think it was like 2 months before birth. When did no, middle of August. So yeah, about 2.5 months before my birth, I finally found a midwife. Before that, I had also hired a doula. So huge shout out to my doula, Thalia. I'm going to post her link below in the show notes as well. Anyone here on Vancouver Island who's thinking of giving birth, reach out to Thalia. She was an amazing, amazing support, and I couldn't have done it without her. My birth team was very important, and she helped me devise a birth plan. So this was a really important part of prepping for labor, right? Was actually having a birth plan and making sure I had a hard copy with me in case I ended up at the hospital. My midwife had a copy, my doula had a copy, like everyone was in the know of my wishes. And that was a really great experience because I knew that I wanted, all these no interventions, delayed cord clamping. I wanted to keep the placenta after. I wanted all sorts of things. And I knew that I could put all that down and that I also had to release expectations around it. So it was a big part of my journey is knowing like, here's my plan, but obviously little baby and the universe may have other plans for me. And I had to really surrender to that, knowing that, okay, maybe I do end up in the hospital, right? There's plan B, plan C, plan D, right? And finding a way to be okay with all of them. And I even had like a natural hospital birth plan in my mind that I actually just wrote out the things that I needed to bring with me to kind of create an environment there that would be manageable for me. So I had my ideal scenario, and then I had a couple other scenarios way back in my brain in case I needed to pull those out. And I really worked for months leading up to my birth to be okay with all of them, which is really challenging when I so badly wanted to give birth at home, right? And when I couldn't find a midwife, I was starting to think of, okay, well, what are my alternatives, right? So really having to be flexible, is a big part of our health journey, no matter what you're doing. So yes, I had a plan, but I also had a plan to shift plans if I needed to, right? And to be okay with however things unfolded as long as my boy got here happy and healthy. And this is a big part of actually the mental preparation that I wanted to mention as well. Before labor, a lot of it was mindset. A lot of it was me really, really deepening into I trust my body. I have all the tools that I need, and even gathering the tools, right? And prepping. I had totes for different things. I had things all organized. I had checklists, of course, my type A personality. But I also had the mental preparation, really knowing that I can handle pain. I have the tools, right? I have a relationship with my body that I trust. I have a relationship with my breath. I knew breath work was going to be a really important part of it, right? So a lot of this was mental preparation and physical. A lot of yoga and stretching and movement and walking and things like that that were preparing my body. Obviously, good nutrition as well, really preparing my body for this journey that it was about to embark on. So, those are just a few pieces that I wanted to mention before, because labor, an actual birth journey, is not just the day you're in labor, right? Or however long it is, right? It is the months leading up to it. And those were probably the most important pieces, right? To prepare me for this, to build my birth team, to have my plan in place, to have my tools and my actual things prepped in my home that I needed, and end up here in my mind, right? Mindset is everything. It's not everything. It's most. It's a lot of it, right? We'll say that. Obviously, there was a lot of physical pieces that were beyond my mental capacity. But the more we can train our brains to trust ourselves, to know that we can handle hard things, the more we're able to have these experiences and to make it through and to be okay. Okay, without further ado, let's dive into the actual story that I want to share with all of you. So, I feel like starting this with once upon a time. Once upon a time on October 21st. Funny little side story here is my midwife was actually going on vacation on October 6th, I think, 5th or 6th. My due date was October 24th. And she was leaving a couple days after my due date for a 2-week vacation. Now, this is one of the snafus that I prepared for. I had a backup midwife. She had a backup midwife for me. I met her in advance. She was lovely. I was mentally completely okay having her at my birth. So knowing that whatever the timing was, I was going to be well supported. So that was really nice. But I was also a part of me that was laughing with my midwife saying, "Okay, well, I better go into labor before you go away." So I had in my mind actually, and I told a few people this in advance, like I just kept imagining the dates, October 20th and 21st. Both dates kept popping up into my mind for weeks leading up to my birth. And lo and behold, I went into labor on October 21st. So, days before my due date, which is rare for a first time mom. They often say that first timers are late. But I love this story because it, for me, was such a powerful reminder of the power of the mind, right? Or my intuition. There was a part of me somewhere that knew 20th and 21st, things were going to start happening. So on the 21st, things started happening. And it was actually in the night. So around 10 o'clock at night, I'd gone to bed, I think around 9:30, getting a lot of rest. Sleeping while pregnant was really hard. So I was trying to do my best to get some sleep. And maybe I went to bed around 9:30. I can't remember. I was asleep and I got woken up by some sort of weird urge in my body. And I thought it was an urge to go to the bathroom, but I was sort of in, when you're in that, like, you're not quite awake yet. I was just kind of a little bit delirious coming out of sleep. And I remember coming out and getting quickly out of bed because I needed to go to the bathroom. And as soon as I stood up, my water broke on the floor. So I laugh at this because so grateful my body just had that urge to get out of bed. So I didn't have to change the bed. The bed was clean. And I went to the bathroom and I was trickling all the way there. And I remember sitting there going, is this what's happening? Did my water just break? It's not this huge gush that you see on TV. It's more of a trickle that any woman knows is definitely not pee, even though most doctors will tell them, oh, you're probably just peeing yourself, which is, again, such bullshit. A woman knows. So I knew. It took me a couple minutes to wrap my head around it. I yelled to Ben, who was still in bed. I think my water broke. Came back to bed, and texted my doula, texted my midwife. It was around 10 at night. So that was an okay time to text them. And yeah, they both assured me it sounds like things are starting and get some rest and let's check in the morning. So around an hour later, my contractions started, which is really good. When your water breaks, they usually give you about 48 hours for contractions to start naturally before they want to start having conversations about inducing you, which I really did not want. Again, no intervention. I wanted my body to do what it knew how to do. And luckily, about an hour later, around 11, contractions started really lightly. Really easy to work through, very soft contractions. I was able to sleep most of the night, obviously, in and out of anxiety and fear and excitement and everything that was going on energetically. But I did have some sleep. So I rested, woke up in the morning, continuing to have really light contractions and really just focused my day on rest. I laid on the couch, watched some movies. I went for a walk. I just ate good food, hydrated a lot. I did final preparations. There were some things that we needed to do, like make the birth bed, pull out some things from the freezer, make some labor aid, made some really, really just supportive, nourishing foods and things. So that was kind of the day, was really just waiting for my body to progress and to do what it knew how to do and kind of just patiently waiting, which was an interesting experience for sure. You're like, okay, when is it gonna, like, it's happening. Um, so I labored, yeah, for the day, did walking, trying to support my body, to lots of stretching to open the pelvis to support, the next phases. My midwife came around 4 in the afternoon to check in on me. We had just a verbal check-in, and I explained, where I was at. The contractions were still really far apart and pretty manageable, through my breath and through movement and stretching and hot water bottle. And yeah, she pretty much, I remember her saying, "Oh, you're not really in labor yet." And I was like, "What? Are you kidding me, lady? I'm in labor." But what she meant is I'm not in active labor yet, which is where you're going from 4 centimeters to 10 centimeters dilated. And that's where things get really intense, right? And there's a lot less breaks and it's a lot more intense and painful. So I wasn't quite there yet. And she assured me to just keep resting, and to perhaps have a bath and see if I could get some sleep. So I did that. I went, had a nice bath, and around 5 or 6, it's all a blur, 5 or 6, I tried to nap. And that was around sunset. So this is really fascinating. I want to pull this out because I've been learning a lot lately about circadian rhythm. And one of the natural things that happens when we are giving birth is melatonin actually increases your, just the whole process. It encourages the cervical dilation and movement of the baby and all sorts of things, right? It's one of the really important hormones in the birth process. So it's not just for sleep, ladies. Melatonin and obviously oxytocin. There's a lot of different hormones pulsing through me as I'm in labor. But this was really fascinating to me because my active labor started as soon as the sun went down, as soon as melatonin started being produced in my body. Isn't that so cool? So this is why many babies are born at night, especially if naturally supported, right? Drugs will obviously augment this if you are doing, having interventions. But when we think of our ancestors, women would go into dark homes with candlelight or caves, right? And give birth in these dark, and animals, that's how animals give birth. They go and hide, they find somewhere dark and safe to give birth. And that darkness is actually a really important part of it. So one of the really key pieces to my birth plan was no artificial lighting. So as soon as the sun went down, everything in my house was either candlelit or lit by red light or yellow light. So I had no blue lights on in my house to continue to support that process. And it was so cozy, but it really worked for me because my active labor came on fast and strong, really fast and strong. So my midwife earlier that day had said, "Oh, just rest and get some sleep. Things will probably pick up tomorrow." She was wrong. A couple hours after she left, they picked up. So I would say around 7 that night, things were starting to get pretty intense. And I was still really leaning on Ben. We were doing some breathing techniques, some hypnobirthing breathing techniques, lots of massage, hot water bottles, rolling around on my exercise yoga ball, movement, lots of the tools that I had. I had prepared, really leaning on those now. And finally around 9ish at night, I decided it was time to call my doula. Like, let's get her here. Things are starting to get a bit more intense and I would love some more support. So she came just before 10. And finally, she took over timing contractions, which was so helpful because obviously Ben is trying to be there to support me, but also timing contractions it was just really challenging to manage all of them. And my contractions were sporadic. This was something I didn't expect and was a little bit confusing. Was, sometimes they were a couple minutes apart, sometimes they were a couple seconds apart, sometimes they lasted for a couple minutes, sometimes they lasted for 1 minute. They were a little bit sporadic. So it was really hard to judge because often the midwife will tell you, like, wait till your contractions are this far apart and last this long for about an hour, then call me. Right. So we were trying to figure out, when do we call the midwife? Like, how far along am I? Right. So around an hour after my doula got there, around 11 o'clock, we were like, okay, we should probably call the midwife. So she called the midwife. Midwife came around 11:30. At that time, I had made my way out of the bath and into my living room where I had my birth bed set up and the fire going and the candles going and all the stuff. And was there, laboring against the couch on all fours. As I mentioned earlier, that is a beautiful way to give birth for many women. And that's where things just got intense real fast. Well, they already were, I'd say, since about 8 o'clock that night. It was getting really difficult to manage contractions. My actually, what I called them as waves or sensations came fast with very little breaks in between, and they were very intense, and I was starting to have a hard time managing them. And especially with no breaks in between. Especially, after I'd say the 11 o'clock mark, I felt like I had no breaks. There were no breaks. It was wave after wave after wave after wave of intensity and pain. And that was my body just doing its thing. And I was leaning on all my supports, and squeezing Thalia and Ben's hands and getting massaged and breathing and making a lot of sound. As you all know, this is actually something I really want to point out. Somatically, I talk a lot about this, and in breath work, especially, and the work that I do, sound is so gosh darn important to helping move energy in our bodies and helping move a child out of your body. So the sound was so important. I was trying on all sorts of different sounds, different breathing techniques, really just trusting the wisdom of my body. Midwife got there around 11:30. Around, she was still setting up, setting her gadgets up. And around midnight, I remember feeling the urge to push and asking for permission to push, which was really interesting because that was a moment where I was not trusting my body. And I was like, I feel like pushing. Can I push? And my doula luckily was right there, and she said, yes, if that's what you feel like doing, trust your body. So I started pushing, and my midwife didn't even have time to give me a cervical check. So fun fact, I didn't have any cervical checks my whole pregnancy and my whole labor. There was no time. She was actually preparing to check, and I'd given her permission to do so. She'd asked, and I started needing to push. And she knew, and I knew, everyone in that room knew that that was my body's wisdom. And that meant that I was fully dilated. We didn't need to look to confirm. She didn't need to feel to confirm. My body was doing what it knew how to do at 10 centimeters dilated. So one of the things that I found fascinating and equally scary in learning about the birth journey is often in a hospital setting, right? You will get checked frequently to see how far along you are. Now, I chose to have very minimal checks because, number one, if I knew that I was, say, 4 centimeters dilated, and it took me 10 hours to get 4 centimeters dilated, my brain is going to think it's going to be another 10 hours or so before I'm actually fully dilated. And that is not the truth. The actual expansion of your cervix is not done in a linear fashion. The amount of time it took you to get to 4 centimeters tells you nothing about how quickly your body may get to 10. So it's actually false information that, for me, I knew was going to cause false beliefs in my brain and possible disappointment, right? Like, oh, okay, now I have to do another 10 hours of this, right? It would have been really disheartening for me. So I chose not to have that information and really just trust the body. And I'm so glad that I did, because then I didn't get in my head about it. And look at what happened. My body automatically knew, and it will know if you're not on an epidural, if you're not on drugs, your body knows when you're 10 centimeters dilated. There's an automatic reflex to push. And I felt that. And it was really wild because it feels a lot like having to take a poo, right? Anyone who's felt that knows exactly what I mean. And I knew that that's what it was going to feel like. So I knew what it was. So I started pushing before my midwife even had a chance to finish setting up. She just got there in the nick of time. And she'd said at one point, I don't remember this, but Ben mentioned this after. She said at that point, "You do you, I'm going to do me over here." And something along those lines. And that was really beautiful because she was, again, this wise midwife stepping back and letting my body do what it knew how to do. And at that point, she called the second midwife who barely made it there on time to, keep an eye on the heartbeat of the baby as I was pushing, and everything was flowing smoothly. So at that point, that was around midnight, and I pushed a lot, and I eventually had to turn over so that I could do skin to skin right away, and that was really painful, moving over and having to just it was that was intense. And there were definitely times where I thought I was dying. I'm not gonna lie. I wanted to vomit. I didn't know if I was gonna be able to do it. Was really doubting myself. I was not breathing properly. There were times where I was very much getting into my head versus grounded into my body with my sound. And I could tell in the moment. And I'm so grateful for my team reminding me how to breathe, reminding me to keep the sounds low in my belly instead of high pitched. That was a big, big game changer, and like really harnessing the sound and breath in my body to move the baby out. It was really hard to do at times, but it was a key part of actually helping him come out. And 35 minutes later, he came out all in one flush, one push, which is really rare as well. Often the head will come out and then you wait for the next contraction and push the body out. But he came out all at once. He was crowning, and I did feel him when he was crowning. I didn't want to move or feel him, but my midwife insisted. She actually forced me to feel him, which I'm glad she did. I was just in such a focused state that I couldn't move, but I did it, and I'm glad that I did. It really helped build that connection with, okay, he's coming, and I need to just keep doing this. And there he was. He came out immediately on my chest. He didn't need any stimulation. He was healthy. He was moving and breathing right away. A little bit of crying, nothing concerning, but enough to know that he's good. He's here. He takes a couple minutes to sort of arrive. A lot of babies do. Like, where am I now? What is happening? And I remember just feeling like the biggest wave of relief. It was probably also oxytocin, but it was also relief that, oh my goodness, that's done. I did that. That was like the highest I've ever felt in my life. Just sheer relief. And I remember actually it took me a couple minutes, or felt like a couple minutes. It could have been a couple seconds to even realize that I was holding my baby. Ben reflected this back to me after I had my head back, and I was just like in awe that I didn't have to push anymore, that I wasn't in pain anymore, that was over. Like, that was so freaking hard that I was just like taking a moment to recalibrate. And then I remember looking down, and there's a baby on my chest, and oh my gosh, he's here. And then I was able to sort of orient to him and take him in. And yeah, we spent the next hour in what they call the golden hour, where I believe everyone should have this opportunity if the baby is healthy, breathing and everything looks okay. Nobody needs to touch your baby for an hour, right? Nobody needs to weigh your baby or clean your baby or poke your baby. So he was on me, just skin to skin. We were naked together for that hour, and really just soaking that in. At the same time, my body was still working on passing my placenta, which came pretty quickly and easily after. We waited until the umbilical cord was white and no longer pulsing to cut it. So making sure that he had all the blood and nutrients from the placenta before we cut that cord. So delayed cord cutting was really important. And that came out easily. And then the news that I had torn, and I was bleeding quite a bit. So my midwives were working on me while I was soaking in my baby, and there was a lot of blood. And they couldn't tell if it was from my tears or from the placenta coming really quickly. So I was trying some, beautiful herbal remedies. There's some teas that you can drink that help shrink the uterus. Oxytocin is the main way that we shrink the uterus quickly after birth to close the wound that was created by the placenta coming off. So I was chugging this tea. My doula was making me this tea, thankfully, and, working on just basking in the magic of my baby, trying to get him to breastfeed. These are things that help produce oxytocin naturally. So I was doing all these things for the hour. And I'm so grateful that my midwives gave me the time to try these natural things. But because there was still so much blood, we didn't know if it was from the tears or from a, placental issue in my uterus. I did decide to take the Pitocin shot. So this was something that was against my plan. But in the moment, he was out of me. He was no longer attached to me. And I didn't want to risk having to, bleeding out, right? Is a serious risk. So that was something that I did decide to do. And a part of why that was important was also because I was going to have to be transported to the hospital. So I would say, one of the hardest parts of my birth was thinking it was over, being cozy at home, holding my baby in my arms, and my midwife telling me that we should probably go to the hospital to get you stitched up. I remember just feeling so disheartened, so also afraid, like getting your vagina stitched up is not going to be fun, and feeling like I'd just been through all this pain and now I had to go back into more pain. And that was really mentally challenging, really mentally disheartening. I was really upset that I had to do that, go to the hospital, leave my home, be in more pain and all of this. But I'm in hindsight, obviously very glad I did it. My midwives were very supportive. Like I said, it wasn't a rush. I got to have my golden hour at home, and then we got me dressed and got Landon dressed, made our way to the hospital. And, I was there for about 2 hours. The on-call doctor came. I live in a very rural area, so there's nobody at 2 a.m. at this hospital. So luckily it was very quiet. We were able to keep a lot of the lights off, as per my request, to not have too many artificial lights on. And it all worked out. And I'm so grateful that I did. Of course, I had second-degree tears that were actually quite deep, and I had two of them, one up near my cervix and one down near my perineum, and would not have been fun to do at home in the dark. My midwife could have absolutely stitched me up, but not laying on the floor with no lights. And it was very good to go to the hospital and have somebody who does this all the time stitch me up. So that was a unfortunate part. Again, like, we don't know what's going to happen. Right. And I had to go with the flow and I had to trust this process. So we made it happen. We got home, I think it was around 5 a.m., and finally got to all cuddle into bed together. My doula came with me the whole way through that, which I'm so grateful for. She made sure I had a snack and I had a shower when I got home, and was tucked into bed, all three of us, and, got a couple hours of sleep in that first night together, I guess, even though it was the morning. And the next day, midwife doula came over, had lots of support, in, all those aftermath pieces. So he came out fast and furious. He was 7 pounds, half an ounce, born October 23rd. So one day before my due date at 12:37 a.m. and perfectly healthy. Beautiful, perfectly healthy. And he's been that way ever since. He is growing fast. It did take us quite some time, that first week, to learn how to breastfeed. I made some errors that were very painful on my part and involved some healing of my nipples, which was, that was horrible. But I made it through, and 7 weeks later, we're getting the hang of things. And yeah, what a wild, wild ride that was. So a couple of things I wanted to mention about that. As I mentioned earlier, I did save my placenta. I had someone come, actually prearranged to come the next day. She picked it up and she processed my placenta with a TCM, so traditional Chinese medicine protocol that involved steaming it with herbs and then dehydrating it and encapsulating it. So I did take it as a supplement for the first, say, month. No, maybe 5 weeks. I just ran out a couple weeks ago. So that was a really key part in supporting me after. And of course, there was a lot of things that I did, afterwards to help me heal. I took daily baths, if not 2 baths a day, sitz baths to be specific. So some really potent and powerful herbs in my baths. I did a lot of resting, a lot of laying in bed, a lot of napping, time in nature, just even around the yard when I was ready to walk again. Good food, supplements, taking a lot of good nutrients in, including stews and soups and my homemade bone broth, lots of warm liquids, lots of electrolytes, and just moving slow. I mean, that was a big part of the healing process that continues to this day, right? Still just letting my body heal, breastfeeding, adjusting to this new life in my life and this new role in my life. So there you have it. That's, the short version of my story, the short/long version of my story. I'm sure there's lots of pieces in there that I'm forgetting right now off the top of my head, but this is, yeah, it's been a really powerful experience. And as painful as it was, and I'm not going to lie to you, it was really difficult those last bits of time. For me, I think what added to that intensity was the speed. So I was in labor for, they would say, about 27 hours. So from my water breaking to baby coming out. But the active part of my labor, where I'm going from 4 centimeters dilated to 10, was only about 3 hours. And I was only pushing for about 35 minutes. And that's fast. So thinking of my mind and my body and the pathways in my body that are designed to release natural pain medication, didn't have as much time to really ease into it, as opposed to maybe being in active labor for 10 hours, right? And having breaks in between each intense contraction and things like that. So it was fast and furious, and it felt that way. And no wonder I tore, right? This is a big part of it, right? The speed in which he came out and the angle in which he came out probably contributed to that. So it's unfortunate, but it happens. And I'm here, back to almost normal. Everything's coming back, everything's healing. And, it is, yeah, it's a blur. It's a blur already at 7 weeks. And I remember feeling like, why do women do this twice? Right? Like, holy smokes. Right. But as the weeks go on, I'm starting to forget the pain more and remember the magic of it and the lessons and the power. And this is how I sort of wanted to wrap up this episode was, I'm starting to reflect, and I will be forever reflecting on the lessons and the growth that came for me during this labor process. And I have no doubt that, there's a completely new version of me here now. And I'm still figuring out who she is. And that is challenging, to be honest. There's a lot of days where that is very confusing and very scary. And I know that it's also really exciting, this new version of me. And the lessons that I got to not necessarily learn for the first time. I can't, at this point in time, I don't know of any lessons that I'm learning for the first time, but I do know that there was a lot of growth and lessons that were kind of taken to the next level for me during this journey. So number one being that, and this I want to share with all of you, right, that we as women are capable of so much more than we think. I have a couple friends who have also recently given birth, and part of their plan was an epidural, was to have some pain support. And in sharing their birth stories with me, one of them actually didn't have time to get an epidural. So she gave birth naturally by accident, I guess. And the other one didn't get an epidural till late. So she actually had to labor a lot on her own before she did get the epidural. And I think both of them got to learn that they were capable of handling more pain than they thought they would. And I think this is the thing. I think we have this fear of pain in our mental pain, emotional pain, physical pain. We have such a fear of it because we've never experienced it. We've never walked ourselves through it. We've always maybe taken the easy way out. This is what our culture trains us to do, especially emotionally, right? Let's bring this back to the theme of this podcast. Don't feel your painful emotions, just eat sugar, right? Or have a drink, right? Like we're taught to avoid pain. And in that, we don't really get to meet our resilient selves. So this has really reminded me, and I want to share with all of you that you are so much more capable of handling pain than you think you are, whether that's emotional pain or physical pain or spiritual pain, right? And you are so damn resilient. So don't forget it. Okay. The other reminder here and big takeaway was that obviously the body knows what's best. Your body knows. The body knows. And I got to really, really in a big way experience that. Like my body knew what to do. It knew when I needed to sit still. It knew when I needed a bath. It knew when I needed to walk and move and stretch. It knew when I needed, to push. It knew all these things without me actually anybody having to tell me to do them. So that is so huge. I can do a whole episode on that, right? The body knows. So listen, right? That's the problem is most of us are not pausing to listen to our body. So please let this be a reminder today, spend some time to listen to your body and ask what it needs. The next lesson and reminder for all of us is that the right type of support is everything. I could not have done this on my own. I could not. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Of course I could. I would. Any woman could. I'm resilient and capable. I did not want to do it on my own. And it's a billion times harder when you're doing it on your own. So the right support was key. And I really spent a lot of time feeling into who I wanted at my birth, how many people I wanted there, what kind of energies I wanted there, and attitudes and belief systems that I want there. Everyone in that room had zero doubts in the wisdom of my body. They were so behind me with knowing and trusting my wisdom. I was the leader. I told them what I needed and they did it. And that was huge because if you have one person in your birth room that does not believe in your body, that is worried all the time, it's bringing that negative energy of, oh, maybe now you should have some interventions, right? This is not supportive. So I spent a lot of time really thinking about that. And the team that I had together, my support team, was so key. And beyond just the people at my birth, by the way, I have a larger support team with my friends and family. We actually had a WhatsApp chat going where I was keeping them all in the loop. Then they were sending me, such good messages and vibes. And that sort of support was so important. I mentioned earlier the next lesson, mindset, obviously, how I manifested the day I was going to go into labor, and just even the mindset going in, knowing that I was trusting my body and that I could handle the pain and that I had the tools that I needed. I mean, the mindset is so huge, right? So I love the saying always, whether or not you think you can, you're right. Right. And I knew I could do this without a shadow of a doubt. And that's why I did it. Right. And as soon as you start doubting yourself, whether it's, whatever healing journey you're on, or giving up sugar or giving birth, right? If you believe you can, you will. So this mindset piece is huge. And of course, there's going to be many more lessons to come. This is not the end of it. There's more unraveling itself. It's only been 7 weeks. And every day I'm learning a new lesson, right? In this new role as a mother. And I'm just so grateful to have the chance to share this with you, to hopefully inspire anyone listening, whether or not the birth part of this story resonates with you, but even just any health journey, right? Please, those final 2 reminders, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, that please trust your body, trust your wisdom, your resiliency, your capability, right? And please put aside the decades of people we've had telling us that we can't do something, that you're not capable, you're not strong enough, you don't know your body, you shouldn't trust yourself. Right? We've got to take our power back. And this starts by trusting the wisdom of our bodies. And the second piece here is know that you have choices. So many women have come to me saying, I didn't know that was an option to say no to that shot, or to not do that thing, or to demand that, no, I do not get an episiotomy. I want to tear naturally, right? Or no, I don't want cervical checks. Did you know that you can say no to those? There's so much, especially in a hospital setting, that is just given to you, often without even asking, but often with this air of fear that you feel stupid for saying no. So there's just so much here, right? And I want you to know that you have the power and the right to say no to anything that doesn't feel right in your body at any time, whether it's birth or some other situation that you're going through, right? And having people there to advocate for you is really helpful. That was definitely needed for me. I was not of sound mind for a lot of that process. And that was the role of my doula, to really ask the questions and to, reinstate my birth plan when needed. And she did that many times. And it was really, really wonderful. All right. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you all for listening. I'm sure my little guy needs me now, probably time to eat again. So I'm going to go nourish him. And I just thank you all so much for tuning in and listening to this episode. As I said, I'm going to post some resources below for some of the books and the podcasts and things that I've listened to really help guide me in my natural birth journey. And of course, there's so much more that I want to share in the aftermath of this journey, but we'll have to do that on another episode. I mean, these last 7 weeks have been insane. And I could definitely record a couple different episodes about the things that I'm learning and having to navigate and, just even the natural health journey in the aftermath of having a child. So things are going well. I'll leave it at that. I'm recording this at the beginning of December. So everybody's happy and healthy, and we're managing all the things that we can, learning how to find sleep when we can. And yeah, just so grateful for all of this and for all of you for following this podcast, for continuing to send me love, even though I'm on maternity leave technically. And I'm kind of pulled back, not working with any clients right now. And I look forward to the day when I do have capacity for that again. And I'm excited to come back, hopefully refreshed and anew later this next year. So stay tuned for more. And of course, I have more amazing podcast episodes coming up for you with some incredible guests that I've prepared in advance coming out in the coming weeks and months. So be sure to subscribe, tune in, and follow this podcast for many, many more amazing tidbits and information. All right, everyone, have a great day. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and share this episode with someone you love. It helps me incredibly reach more people and help more women who need this information. And if you're ready to go deeper into discovering your unique root causes and patterns keeping you hooked on sugar year after year, be sure to come and check out the brand new free root cause quiz that will give you actionable items to finally begin healing your relationship with sugar from the inside out. You can find the link to download this quiz and other amazing resources in the show notes below. I also wanted to just take a quick minute to share a disclaimer. The information provided in this podcast is for general purposes only and is not at all intended to be professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And as much as I do my best to bring you up-to-date and accurate information, please remember that I'm also sharing my opinions, stories, and ideas that are ultimately not supported by mainstream science. My personal advice should not be taken as professional advice, and you are always encouraged and advised to consult with your own healthcare practitioner before making any changes to your health and wellness routine. This podcast is intended to inspire and offer you alternative views to healing your relationship with food, mind, and body. It is up to each listener to take responsibility for their own health and wellness decisions. I hold no liability or responsibility for your results or lack thereof. Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast, and we can't wait to see you in the next episode. Let's go.